Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today I thought I would just sort of cover a boatload of things I've got on my mind. It'll be for the normal YouTube publication, so we'll be a little careful with some things we talk about. But here's sort of the framework of what I want to talk about and why. I have lots of conversations with other people. And what's interesting about it is that, probably a lot of you have the same exact situation. If you're vocal about being a little different in the mind, you do your research on a lot of interesting subjects. And I mean, everything we talk about on the show is just you, and then your own experiences, right? And you let me know if you have this experience, which is, it's interesting how you can see trends of sort of waking up, if you will. And there's sort of like, let's just say, pure example, there's 50 things you could talk about in becoming more enlightened in your world, meaning you can see more and see more. You don't have all the answers. You don't have all the empirical truths, but you've pulled some threads out of sweaters and you definitely have some meat on the bone, right? So you're going down some rabbit holes, as they say, right? Doesn't have to be super controversial, anything. It could be being spiritual, it could be a piece of history. Because there's only so many times we can talk about politics or anything like that before it just kind of dead ends into the same, well, we got to make some changes, right? There'll be a certain collection of topics. It could be up to half a dozen or whatever, that tend to kind of rotate. It's almost like something's kind of dancing through the options of what we can talk about. And the world tends to just, I don't know, through sheer reading the stuff online, maybe we're triggered to think about things because we have a Telegram subscription of a certain type, or you're just ingesting certain arteries of information, or there's an overall consciousness to this awakening that gets us all on the same page for a little while, and we all kind of rotate, it seems, together. And there's always like a little fringy thing that kind of attaches when you have conversations. So let's just say 5 things or things you would talk about that you're thinking about. Someone else you're talking to brings up those 5, and there's 2 or 3 others that they'll say, oh, well, did you hear about this? You ever talk about that or research this? And then you're like, oh gosh, yeah, that thing, yeah, what do you know about that? You've gone like 2 steps in and they've gone 100 steps in. And there's a lot of that going on these days because, again, the more we get disinfo, the more we get gaslighted. And remember, gaslighting is you're getting too many versions of the same truth that are complete contradictory to each other. You can't trust any of the information that you get. Now, AI is creating images that are threatening history on a level that's crazy. So I wanted to kind of go through some things and some revelations I've had recently, the past like 3 days, that concern me. One of the things that concerns me, this is almost a whole episode I could do on this, but I feel like it's not enough. Even if I could talk for an hour and a half or whatever on it, you won't want to listen to it for an hour and a half because you're going to get my point really quickly. And it's, we're in a world where I think 25 years ago, no one was worried about being conservative or liberal. We didn't talk about it like that at all. We just lived life, and it was great. We didn't have the distraction of the internet to program our minds with all these weird agendas and hates and loves, right? They tell you who to hate and they tell you who to love online constantly, right? They're basically fighting for that privilege, which is why, again, you have to be extremely careful about any artery that you allow towards yourself, be it a trustworthy source, quote unquote, or anything. Just don't watch normal television for sure. It's bad. Do streaming if you got to watch a show, and be careful about the show. Figure out who's making the show, who's publishing the show. If it's a traditionally bad source of information and you watch a show and you're like, well, this doesn't seem to be that manipulative, it probably is. It's just more subdermal, right? One of my concerns is that I think you could say you could call it a fake conservative. It's not that direct, of course, but you have a bunch of people who think that they're conservative. They could just express a litany of things that they think is wrong with the world. They could talk about agendas to destroy the world. And sadly, they're doing it 150%. And I'll give you an example. I'm at the age where, the females that are in my realm are kind of having to make that decision. Do I get married and have a family, or do I continue on as a career person? They've been generally conservative, and I don't mean crazy, extreme on any one direction, but they've been sort of middle of the road, good citizen of the world, do no harm kind of person, right? And they are essentially towing the absolute agenda of those who don't wish us any well-being, who, if they could push a button, we would cease to exist. And the analogy I gave a friend of mine the other day went like this. Take like a Klaus Schwab kind of guy. And you get a chance to express yourself to that guy. He's in a room. You're safe. There's not going to be any repercussions or retaliation against you in any way, shape, or form. So you get to express yourself. And a female in her between 35 and 45 has been very awakened recently and studied these things that we talk about, especially in the Chaos Reports on rumble.com. Please understand there's rumble.com. It has a few more videos from time to time that we don't have on this channel, on the normal YouTube distribution, due to censorship of the truth. But this person says, I think, you're trying to, let's say, remove people from the world, reduce the number of people on the world. I mean, we got all kinds of players that are doing this, right? From ex-software CEOs to people like Klaus, to people in the middle like George Soros kind of guy. And you just read in the whole riot act. You see, you're trying to do all this programming to people to get them to do this, and you call them a name, and you did a good job, man. This woman just does a great job calling this guy everything in the book that he really is. And Klaus just takes a beat in the script and looks at this woman and just starts smiling. Even laughs a little bit. And she goes, "What are you laughing about?" And he says, "Well, you can hate me all you want, but I got a report on who you are, and it looks like you are engaging everything that I've been selling you, you've been buying. Are you married?" And she goes, "Oh, no." Do you have any kids?" "No." "Do you have a bunch of money in the bank saved up?" "No." "Well, then you're my bitch. You are literally doing everything I've told you. You're barren. You didn't populate the world at all. That's exactly what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to die in a ditch, broke, without any heirs, and you're doing that. So tell me how much you're against me when you live literally within the charter that I've been passing out and others have been passing out since, say, Agenda 21 was hatched in the late 80s, early 90s. You are that person. You're into consumption. You spend all your money, no matter how much money you make, you spend it all on crap. But you got a rationale for every piece of crap that you buy. You're a foodie, and so you go spend all your money on, $500 dinners just to tell people on Instagram that you have a better life than they do. That's what I want you to do. You're trying to be famous on Instagram, right? You post yourself and, you get a few followers, and then it starts slowing down. So you take a little bit of more clothing off, right? And you get more subscribers. And you start worrying about how many subscribers you have instead of living your life for yourself to people that you really know in the real world, the way it was 25, 30 years ago. So these people are all over the place. Do you have more than you need? Almost every American has to admit, unless you just went through like some financial crisis and lost everything, you have way more than you need. And it's not reserves in case a rainy day shows up. You have junk that's worth nothing, items that depreciate very quickly, cars that aren't worth anything, but you paid a tremendous amount of money for them. This is a problem, I think, that I'm starting to see now in droves. And it's programming. It's absolutely programming. If you've been listening to me for, at least the last year, I've been talking about a trend, and I'm going to bore some of you if you heard this again, but I kind of want to drive this into your mind because I'm going to give you another example that just dawned on me. Television. I think that right at the turn of the 70s, we had I'm just going to go this really quickly. So you have 3 shows that I think were very on point with destroying the family. And these are great shows. They're funny, they're well written, great actors. They probably either didn't know what was going on or they're on team. But it was MASH, Cheers, and Frasier. On MASH, you have a military group in Korea, the Korean War, sorry. Everybody's there without their spouses because they're in the military. A bunch of people are cheating on each other. One guy, Hawkeye, who's the actor in real life, is a big women's lib guy. It's really funny. But he basically drove into the minds of people, I think 12 seasons or so. Cheat on your wife, cheat on your husband, cheat. He even had a partner swap out in the 3rd season, 3rd to 4th. The guy was married and wouldn't touch anybody, but he egged the guy on until he cheated on his wife. And the episode was about how bad he felt, but he did it. Nurse Hot Lips. She had the captain that was her boyfriend. He's married. He's cheating on his wife. You get into Cheers, you get a whole litany of more dimensions. You have the Ted Danson character, Malone. He's single, can't possibly lock down a marriage. Diane was an absolute nerd, and it was stupid to be smart. That's what she was. That turned into the Simpsons' daughter. But the whole thing is Norm's married, won't go home to his wife. Cliff Clavin's a complete, nerd to the point he's basically chick repellent. It goes, and it was just basically these guys living off of the Malone character. If he goes out and he sleeps with a bunch of girls at the same time, they're just living off of his life story. Okay. Well, Frasier and his wife, Lilith, these are all the fictional character names, goes off and makes a show called Frasier. Lilith cameos into it, but Frasier's divorced, and their marriage during Cheers was a complete catastrophe, reinforcing marriage is horrible. For the one couple that got married, it was horrible, right? Well, now he's single. He can't lock it down with another woman. Of course, that would destroy the dynamics of the show. He has to be single. That's the show. But his brother, Miles, is married to a woman that never appeared on camera. He hates his marriage, and he wants to sleep with the maid. And eventually, there's evolution in that part of the story. Okay, so the other one that I just realized, as of, say, the late 80s all the way to 2005, is the Star Trek series, which I'm a huge fan of. There's not a single Star Trek show I probably haven't seen 4 or 5 times, okay? Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Nobody's married on the show. And 95% of the cast members, or the characters, in the show, have no spouses. If there was a love interest, they can't quite lock it down because of career, interfering issues. It's programmed on TV. You don't notice it, but it reinforces your opinion of yourself and what you should be doing and where the sacrifices should be. Who's number 1 priority? Who's number 10 priority, right? Now, I grew up in the first generation where it was divorce was going to happen to your family. I remember when I was like the early 80s, late 70s, when my parents really got divorced. Then the statistics started kind of getting bantered around. I'm a child, right? So it's getting bantered around me that, it was like 30, 40%, and then it's 50, then it's 60. Now it's like 80% of Americans get divorced. It's amazing to find anyone that stayed married. And why is that? Well, it's always the grass is greener model that's sold to Americans, right? And I don't know about your country, but it was always, if you can just, and they make each spouse, one of them, only one spouse has to fall for the programming online, right? On TV and stuff, right? to get cantankerous with the spouse, to say, oh, I should have more. I should have more gluttony in my life, right? We have what we need, but I should be able to get more. And my spouse should be able to bring me more, you know? As the pornographic industry blows up, then you have couples falling apart because one of them becomes a pervert and wants the other one to do a bunch of stuff that they don't want to do, or do it with somebody else because that's what they saw online. So many stories of this, right? What we have to understand as citizens of the world is that if you're going to ingest media of any kind, movies, television, internet stuff, they are attacking us from every conceivable angle that would destroy our lives. And they are also telling the story, the same deprogramming of your mind, right? You have a good program in your mind when you're born: do no harm, help others, you know, get married, have kids, all that kind of stuff. Because there's really, I would say, you know, a minimum of like 4 stages to life. You have childhood, you have your adolescence, then you have your adulthood, single, adulthood, married, adulthood with kids, and then the 5th one, which is being grandparents. And this completes the human experience, to go through all those phases and to care in different ways for other human beings. When it's your child, you care about that child in a particular way. Well, when it's your grandchild, you care about your grandchild in a completely different way than you care about your child. Plus, you've weathered up a little bit better. You know not to react perhaps as extreme as you did as a parent because it was your first time doing it. As an adult, which is now sort of a commodity. If you can find anyone that has actually become an adult in this world, it's a rarity, isn't it? I mean, really, as a sort of a calm during the storm, whispers instead of screams, you know, having that wherewithal to have linear mind enough to say, well, this is a chess game of how I handle any one particular unfortunate situation that might occur. Could be a minor one, could be a big one. And so the whole thing is, well, if I react this way, it's going to exacerbate everything that's bad in the situation. If I feed in and I get angry, raise my voice, call someone a name, it's all going downhill from there. Well, sometimes, unfortunately, when you try that out, you'll figure out that's the worst way to handle it. So the second, third, 100th, 500th, 1000th time you do it, you start calming down your soul, you know? Now, what's also interesting is that I think we're either consciously or subconsciously figuring a lot of this out, in that humans have this amazing sensory system for positive and negative, for good and evil. We do. When we experience something and we're older, this amazing little report card comes in every single time you complete an experience. Was that positive or was that negative? The next stage is to figure out, well, if it is a positive, what made it positive? And let's try to repeat that behavior. Let's try to repeat the elements that made that a positive thing. When it's negative, you're like, okay, you need to do a postmortem on this. How did I make things get worse? How could I have figured this out, better? First time I ever dealt with a girlfriend that was hysterically drunk. Or I should say, she wasn't hysteric yet. She was totally plastered. And I mean, couldn't speak English, plastered. And I'd never been with someone like that in my life. I didn't know this person drank that much. And there was an accident where that person happened to knock a giant glass of red wine on a white carpet on a property I was renting. And this guy was like a total nitpicking guy anyway. So I was like, oh my God, I can't afford to just replace the carpet. And so I'm like, I'm right in the middle of that situation. I elevated really fast. And I was disgusted with that person's inability to control their alcohol. And I laid into him just a little bit. I pointed at the carpet and I said, look what you just did. Oh my God, I'm gonna get in trouble here. Blah, blah. Boy, I'd never dealt with an irrational drunk before. And she immediately went crazy, just utterly nuts, got violent. And it was a bad night. It was like monitoring this person from about 4 a.m. to about 11 a.m, puking constantly. I didn't realize there was, you can die from alcohol exposure, right? I learned that later. But now, after that experience was over and I grew up a little bit, I thought, okay, if someone has had too much to drink and they're starting to act weird, you have to go into baby mode because they have become an absolute child with their alcohol consumption. They're not a nice drunk. You don't know yet. You don't want to play that game. Well, we'll give them crap until we'll see if they're about. Don't ever do that, right? You got to calmly figure out, you have to empathetically jump into their brain, trying to see the world as they might be seeing it, which is basically they have 2 units of power for every 10 units they have when they're sober, and just guide them to happy places, right? But they're going to want more drink. That's the other crazy thing, right? And you got to figure out a way to not furnish that for them, right? But those are little lessons that you learn as time goes on, right? What I am seeing as a result of this sort of finding out that what's for sale isn't worth buying, I found a lot of my friends are going into more spiritual realms. Very, very interesting. And I think in one way, just beautiful and wonderful. And I'm not, I've been fairly upfront with you guys about my religiosity. I believe in God very, very much. And it seems logical to me when I look at life. Everything that's alive is beautiful. It is. All the designs of all the little insects and fish and humans were just amazing, all of us, right? But I think it's a good place to be as long as someone doesn't become one of these judgment people. I had a relative once that got into a church and had never been into a church ever in any serious vocational way to read the Bible and figure out what it says. But this person would come home and then just tell everyone they're going to hell, and just pick something, little tiny thing in your life as if they're absolutely perfect in the glass house. And they lost communication with the family for at least 10 years. And it was finally, I finally laid into this person and said, look, I love you, but this has got to stop. This is utterly ridiculous. This isn't how Christ behaved if you believe in his authenticity. And I can't imagine God would want you to behave this way. And it was funny. Within about 2 years, that person softened up and just started saying, hey, how you doing? Not, some Bible verse or something. In fact, I've had 2 people in my life like that. And there was always an air of kind of superior smugness that they're ordained to go to heaven and you're not. That's one of the dangerous things about religion. However, a recent friend of mine, the last, I'd say 2 years, really started reading the Bible and started going to church and just figuring it out. And sifting through any type of behavior that was going to make them acidic to other people, and they became they were already a beautiful person, and they became more beautiful and interesting, and they increased their ability to communicate about these subjects because they had the terminology to talk about, which they didn't have before reading the Bible in general, right? So I'm seeing a huge increase in spirituality in people. The other one is just simply being spiritual. People realizing, and I've talked about this at length on my show. I've got several episodes in the spirituality category on the website, deepthoughtsradio.com, where I talk about, what would it be like to truly live your life knowing that there is another realm that we're going to, and that there's a lot of evidence that reincarnation is definitely a thing that you can do. I don't know if it's forced on you, but that the spirits that have passed can choose to continue to contribute to this reality. It is, they could just come back and say, hey, I'm okay, I'm on the other side, like my grandmother did with me, and my buddy's son did that. When his son died, his best friend got the same communication, and they used the same exact phrase between the two of them. My grandmother passed away, I think, somewhere around 2009. His son passed away in 2020. And they both said to the other person they were communicating, one was me, they say your name, and then they say, I just want you to know I'm on the other side and I'm okay. And so my grandmother said that to me, and I found out 2.5 hours later she had passed, didn't know she was dying. And my buddy's son said that to his best friend, and my buddy's literally saying these same words back to me many years later, right? It's like 11 years later. And so I'm like, okay, that's got to be some empirical evidence of the fact that this realm exists. All right. So when you get spiritual and you start to, again, realize you're probably not a body. You're probably, I mean, you are, but you're temporarily a body. You're permanently a soul. It should affect a little bit of the priorities in your life about what's most important in your life. And I assure you, none of it's online. None of it's in a television stream. None of it. It might be nice. You might watch, especially a classic movie that doesn't have any of this agenda embedded in it, although a lot of them do. You're happier because you're like, wow, okay, I don't need to sweat so many different topics in my life. Yes, there's people on the other side of the world suffering, but they're in the same ecosystem that I'm in, and it's a spiritual ecosystem. So even if a massacre were to occur, which is horrible, they're okay. Their souls are okay. It is a sad report card on the world that we have brought together and incubated up a planet that has so many dysfunctional humans that these events occur, whether it be humans that organize the events or humans that actually randomly go nuts and hurt other people. I'm going to propose what might be kind of a radical idea. In America, I do not know if Europe has the same situation. We have the Amish and we have Quakers. The Amish is usually the group that we reflect on when we talk about this kind of thing. I know very little about the Amish, okay? But I do know that they have limits for how much of the modern society they allow within their circles of their families. They live basically an extremely primitive life as compared to the average citizen of the United States. I think they have electricity, but they could live without electricity. They train their kids to build homes and cook and clean and do every single chore that we used to do to build this country up in the 1800s. That's sort of where they stopped taking in the outside world. Now imagine, and it's funny because it was funny when a medical regimen came around and they didn't take it and they didn't have any, and this was like way back in the 90s, they didn't have a particular mental problem in their kids except for the ones that they adopted from the outside world who had these regimens in their bodies and they have all kinds of learning disabilities and all kinds of other stuff, but their kids didn't have it. I think they also avoided the medical regimens as of 2020 to 2022. And I think they all survived just fine. Very interesting, right? Now, imagine in the 21st century, what if we had a group of people that said, let's at least go back to maybe 1965, maybe 1970. There might be a few more years you can add into that. The 70s is when movies became extremely demonic. Look at all the big scary movies that came out in the 70s and look at the content of those movies. You need to see the devil. You need to see massacres. You need to see killers in the woods. You need to see a mental patient that comes home and kills everybody with a mask on. Well, there's the other one had a hockey mask on, right? But they made you look at their rituals. They made you look at their ways. So let's say we stop somewhere in the 60s. Productive society people. All right. We don't have digital watches. Let's put it that way. I don't even know what you would call this group. But what if we did have a group that basically rejected all of the social media, rejected online in general? Maybe you had you can still walk into a bank and do some business, but that'll probably squeeze out at some point. But maybe you just have a terminal somewhere in your village whereby you could go there and the bills get paid. Maybe even one person is the only person that actually touches everybody's accounts, gets everything paid for. So you can quarantine the rest of your society to live absolute reading, writing, and arithmetic curriculums for school. No school is allowed to talk about anything other than learning. Trade skills, as a matter of fact. And it's everything modern in the world, except for the programming. You simply live a world where programming from an outside source is just not invited in. You don't have to pass any laws or anything in your little community. You just basically say, we don't do this. And you teach the children sort of what a lot of fictional movies have done, which is that technology got out of control and started destroying society, so we don't do that. Now think about the fact that your kids would be the most highly educated kids in the world, especially if you handled it and built your own little schools and stuff. You teach them the real science of the world that actually resulted in inventions that are used instead of theoretical sciences that have never invented anything. Well, what's that do? Well, imagine you could get a child to think about real science as I always talk about on the show. You want to go into science, you go into ethereal sciences. It beautifully marries every single division of science that's out there. Imagine the medical science. We go and we take out all of those companies, those pharma companies that introduced all these weird regimens, and we get back to what we used to do to stay healthy. The food that we create in that community is all created within the community, from the livestock, meat harvesting, down to the vegetables. You're not selling it to anybody. So once you don't sell it to anybody, you lose all the regulations of the World Trade Organization, which will basically say that the stuff has to be treated in a way that makes it unhealthy. Yeah, you got to fight off rodents and stuff. But what's actually interesting is when I was a kid, I lived in Kansas too. Everybody lived out in the country, always had enough land to create a farm, a little tiny plot of land. We had a pretty good, I don't even know how much it was. It was big. Big plot, a big chunk of land right next to our house, and we tilled that up, and man, we had everything. We had corn, lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries, carrots, everything you could possibly want, with all the vitamins and minerals in there. Of course, with this community, we'd want to tarp it, put it inside some sort of greenhouse so that dust that falls out from the sky doesn't infect our soil and make it non-acidic. Therefore, it doesn't grow anything. All right. And again, you're just growing it for your own consumption. That's it. Imagine all the water that everybody consumes in your community goes through a reverse osmosis process. Therefore, it doesn't have anything in it but water. It's as close to distilled water as possible. You're going to eat your minerals. You're not going to try to consume it through your water. But whatever water has in it that's natural, spring water that's not polluted, well, that's what we would work on to make sure that we have. Plus, you could dig a well. You can use a divining rod to figure out where the electricity is coming out of an aqua ravine, and you could dig right there. Boom, you got it. Imagine that. Now, let's play that up a little bit. You don't create a compound like Koresh did, right? Because that gets you noticed. You don't buy a gigantic stockpile of weapons and ammo to get yourself noticed, right? You don't do that. Does everybody have a rifle, a shotgun, and maybe a pistol? Sure, but you keep it down, like a normal level of ownership per person, per adult. And of course, you want to teach your kids how to hunt. Maybe use bow and arrow, like Ted Nugent, right? Like Ted Nugent says, I shoot one arrow, I kill one animal, and then I eat that animal down to its bones. And we even use the bones for other things, right? His family's been that way for generations. Most people don't know that about him. Something like that. But now you advance that forward a decade, maybe 20 years, 30 years, and society will start trying to infiltrate your group, probably government-wise with people that are going to disrupt things. But if nothing else, they're going to try to make you an outcast, just like we do the Amish, just like we do the Quakers. I have so much respect with what little knowledge I have about the Amish that they know when they turn a corner on a horse and buggy, because that's what they use to travel a lot of times. They've even taken cars and pulled them out of ditches with their horse and buggies. It's the funniest videos you'll see online about that. But they withstand all the criticism for, 100 years, 100 plus years. They've withstood all the criticism and they kept to their ways. And some of their kids, there's legendary stories where some of the kids will defect out, go to the city, get all involved with drugs, alcohol, and all this other stuff, and super duper regret it and come home. Because they realized why their group was created in the first place. Now, if technology can be useful in a tool way, well, absolutely use it, 100%. But once it starts trying to transmit a message that's outside of its charter, you just get rid of it. Here's another random idea that came to me the other day. I tell all you guys and gals that you need to watch the movie Rollerball from 1975 with James Caan. I got a whole episode on the website. I suggest you watch it. There's actually another version of that in a YouTube channel I created a long time ago called Real Time Cigar Reviews, which I did like 9 episodes. Got some weird followers, and I just stopped because I had this show instead, right? But Rollerball is out there too. But there's pictures in the one at deepthoughtsradio.com. But this is a movie about the near future of the world, probably 2060, somewhere in there, where corporations had completely taken over the world. There's no talk of reducing how many people live here, but you don't get the sense it's overpopulated or anything. It's about a guy who plays a game called Rollerball, and he's the best of the best. And they want him to retire in the first act. And he's like, why would we want me to retire? I'm in the prime of my life. I am the best player in the world. And he's told, on no uncertain terms, well, that's why we want you to retire. The game was supposed to promote unity of a group and no individuality. And you became an individual within the game. And we have to get rid of you because you're teaching the world that an individual is better than the group, that it can stand up and be a personality all by themselves. Okay. Now let me ask you, I just watched the Super Bowl, which was rigged in a couple different plays. Go see our Telegram channel, Deep Thoughts channel. You can actually look up Deep Thoughts on Telegram. You want to download the app from telegram.org. Do not get it from any store, either the Apple Store or the Google Store, because they censor you. Okay. They won't let you see comments. But get it from their, because I don't even know, you can't even really do it from the Apple side, but you can do it from the Android side, the APK file. Anyway, what corporation nowadays can you name that isn't doing advertising way outside of the products that they offer? They're doing agenda commercials. Commercials that are complete agendas that have nothing to do with their company. That just sells a computer, maybe a phone, maybe some other service, maybe a drug you're supposed to take, right? But instead, they're doing all this agenda stuff. And it makes you feel a little upset when you see it, right? Why am I seeing that? Why don't you just sell a computer? Imagine, like in America, we pass acts. We pass bills, we pass laws that basically tell people, and well, basically tell the land, we all agree on something and you can't do it anymore, or you can, right? Imagine us passing the Corporate Agenda Act. Just imagineering here, you might feel me on this. But in that act, it would say, or bill or law or however statute, however we want to enforce this, that's similar to the Propaganda Act that came out of the television show Clue, which was feeding the contestant the answers and therefore became a superstar, and was later revealed that they had done that. And everyone got so angry in this country of America against the show Clue that they made them pass a law that said that broadcast news especially cannot, and television shows cannot do propaganda. It was recently reversed by the Obama administration, because they knew they needed that capability, especially for the presidential election of 2020. Not saying anybody lied, but you make up your own mind, right? But imagine if you were, say, a really popular, slick, overpriced computer company that made phones and tablets, maybe a VR headset as well, and it simply said, you can only advertise your product. You can do it to your heart's content, talk about all the features, all that kind of stuff. But within those commercials, your print ads, your online ads, and your website, you're not allowed to ever communicate an agenda. You might want to honor someone who's passed away. That's fine. But you can't tell children something that is not about your computers. You're not allowed to tell the world anything that's not about your computers. Oh, you can make your commercials as diverse as you want. That's fine. The public will decide whether or not they want to align with that. I mean, imagine how deep that could get. You could say no human beings. You could say just put your computer up there, rotate it, open the lid, show all the features, do blowouts and stuff, but no human beings can show up because that could create some bias, some agenda subliminally, right? Imagine how that little act would utterly silence probably 40% of what we intake around the world. Wouldn't that be amazing? And imagine, because this exists in, say, China. China does this. China has a lot of laws about this. As much as I may not be a giant fan of the CCP, that's one thing that seems interesting to review. Now, there would, of course, be an artery, and that's fictional television, fictional film, because you could not create something, nor would we probably want to limit the ability to tell a story. Hey, you can buy the ticket if you want. You can turn on the show if you want. At that point, it's a projection of who you are as to what you watch habitually. And everyone can get stuck in a show. It's got some stuff in it, and then you back out. I saw that one thing. It's not my gig. I don't want that in my household. But if we were in that other realm, imagine the content gets blessed by the elders first. I know it sounds a little nuts, right? But you look at an old classic movie, Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, all these movies that are great. There's a lot of great films that come out that do not have any overwhelming subtext to them, besides humanity, besides a human being becoming a hero under pressure, making good decisions. Inspiring movies. By the time it's over, you felt like you learned something. That used to be the goal of Hollywood, was that you wanted to watch a movie and it made you a different person. It made you aspire to be a better human being under a lot of occasions. And every film was like that. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey, for instance, didn't really have that. It just made you really think. Right? Your brain's like, what was that? What was this? What was that? Oh my gosh, I can't forget this for the rest of my life, right? I've said this several times, and I feel like I got to say it again. When I started my show, in 2015, having concluded the radio show for the previous year and some change, I never thought that the things I talked about, which are all the banned videos, you got to go to deepthoughtsradio.com, scroll down to the category section, and look at the section called Remove from YouTube. Make sure you've seen every one of those videos, please, because that's where the most concentrated stuff is that they don't want you to see, which is obviously not lies, it's the truth, right? And some of you are catching on to it. You're like, where's that video? I always refer to that video and it's missing. It's like, yeah, it just got removed, okay? But when you make videos, which again, in 2015, it was just really the budding point where a lot of folks were coming on board for all different reasons. But you sit and you make these videos and you wonder to yourself, am I going to seem crazier and crazier over time? That I'm talking about things that I won't even mention by subject matter in here because I don't want to get struck on this video. But, maybe agendas that reduce the amount of people on this planet by 97%. Other agendas that are just, at the time, seemed jaw-droppingly crazy. And now I'm sitting here 9 years later, and I seem light in comparison to the stuff that's being reported online in these scene arteries. Light. And, I would never make a video that's totally wrong and leave it up there. If I made a video that's like, oh my gosh, everything I said in this video was complete BS, I would take it down, I made probably 10 videos related to that letter movement, and I took them all down because in the end, I realized, okay, if this thing was real, I don't think a lot of the stuff would be happening that happens today. And there's still a slight margin. It could be real, But I don't agree with the observations that I was making at the time. But in terms of the overall global agendas, especially the ones that I learned from a woman named Rosa Koire, Koire, she was 1,000% correct. 1,000% correct about absolutely everything. You got to look this woman up, watch every single interview she ever did. I posted a huge batch of her videos on Telegram. But you owe it to yourself. Got to watch her stuff. So now, the trend there is actually more terrifying than the actual individual subject matter that I might have been reporting on. And again, I'm getting my information from other people, so I take no credit for figuring out the large majority of what I've communicated in those areas. There's some things I think I piece together, other folks don't. But overall, it's 97% other people's brilliance, right? And the only skill that I have, I think, is to filter out the logic of, well, I don't think that particular thing's happening. You know, I don't believe in human cloning for reasons, but I do believe in doubles, you know. So the scary part for me is the current stuff that's on the table today. There's a lot of concerns about things like artificial intelligence. I'm going to give you something I woke up to today. Charlie Murphy is Eddie Murphy's brother, right? He's passed away, unfortunately, way too early. He talked about a funny episode where Rick James was invited to Prince's Paisley Park place to play basketball against all his dudes, right? And the funny story is that Prince shows up fully dressed like he does in concert with all of his guys dressed in all this kind of like feminine clothing. And they had a basketball game, and Prince's team just destroyed them because Prince is actually was an extremely good basketball player from youth. I mean, he was just a deadly 5'3", but he could just make any shot. And that's what Rick James said later on in interviews. Like, this guy just made every single shot. He never shot and missed, you know. They killed us. And then later on, the story goes is that, and this is all Charlie Murphy, confirmed by Rick James himself, they invited everybody back to Prince's house, and Prince made everybody pancakes because he was a vegetarian eventually. And this really took place. All right. So I woke up, and this is an AI story, okay? Some random suggestion on Instagram. And I use Instagram to do some business. I just put up photography on my site. It's locked down because I don't want to get invites by, I don't want a bunch of weird bots joining my page, right? And taking my photographs and reposting them as somebody else, right? But I'm looking at this photo gallery that is photoreal, and it's claiming to be photographs from that unique 1985, which I didn't think it was 85. I thought it was a little bit later, but 85 doesn't make sense for Rick being involved. But it's supposed to be this event, and it's like literally showing guys playing basketball, and there's this dude kind of looks like Prince, and this dude kind of looks like James. Rick James, that is. Rick. And it's about, 8 photographs. And eventually I have drawn and painted Prince's face, sold lots of paintings. I know what this dude looks like. I was an obsessive fan back in that time frame. I'm like, and this isn't Prince. And so finally, of course, at the end, it's all AI. But the post didn't say it was AI. And they were trying to portray this as real life events. And again, the AI isn't quite allowed to completely mimic a celebrity's face for copyright reasons. But that's eventually going to go away, I think. I mean, maybe Prince's empire can defend him against that, but I don't know if Rick James has the same. Prince has a sister that's taking care of his franchise. She would sue you to death, hopefully. But Rick, I don't know if his family exists in a way that could protect him. Because the record companies aren't going to protect you. They just own the music. They don't care. So reality is going to get skewed in a way that I don't know if most human beings can fathom it. I was talking to a friend of mine today, as a matter of fact, and I said, imagine someone walks up to you. This is a female. And I said, they just take your photograph with the camera, or they tear down photos online because you post your face everywhere because you're trying to be famous online, right? Which, again, nobody alive cares. That's what you got to tell yourself. You're trying to post something to be famous. Like, nobody cares. You're going to have to accomplish something. You can't just post your face up there. No one gives a shit. Okay. I'm sorry. Nobody does, right? I always think, I've always said on the show that I think Instagram is probably one of the best social media creations until recently, because you're posting really your life as it really exists, as opposed to all of the sensationalism we get on other platforms. But even that gets skewed, of course. I may or may not believe that completely now. But they take a picture of your face. You're a female. Hell, you could be a male. Doesn't matter. But then they take your photograph home, put on their headset, and they make love to a doll. And that doll has now been AR'd to be you. And then, just like a Black Mirror episode, there's something up there on the cloud that basically tells you, like a OnlyFans, hey, I'm a whore website, that basically says, oh, one more ding to a random stranger making love to your image at their house. And it's a new subscription thing, right? It's not a subscription. Well, actually, like your sub count, right? Your followers, right? And you have like, whoa, I've had, 60,000 men make love to me because I'm so pretty. Can you imagine that? The objectification, it's going to happen. That is going to take place. Whether or not it's recorded online, I think it will be eventually. More of this degrading of society to the point a woman just utterly objectifies herself. She's not, or he's not, a slut in real life, but they're a slut online. They're a slut in the virtual AI world. And if that edification of absolute random, creepy weirdo having sex with you is revered as some metric that makes you popular, because all you have to do is have the world degrade their mind to make that a thing, right? Someone comes up, wants to shake your hand because, Wilt Chamberlain, forget that 10,000 people he did. You got 100,000, and boy, you're just something else, aren't you? I don't know how the ladies would do it, but... So let me step back here for 1 second and ask you a rhetorical question. Why is it that before the internet, this stuff was never a necessity of man? Why was it, or how was it possible for a human being to live a fully satisfied life? And I mean really satisfied life prior to all of this media, as Marshall McLuhan clued us in, right? He said, be careful. Medium is the message, but it's more important that you understand that the way you get information through a device is going to be more critical than the information that you get. He wasn't saying the information you're getting, the bad information you're getting, the manipulative information you're getting isn't crucial. But he understood when it was a transition between radio and television, he saw a transformation in mankind where man was starting to become zombies in front of TVs. Film just kept getting better and better and better. Had the guy known how unbelievably accurate he was, look at the headsets that are coming out. Rewriting reality live, right? Marshall McLuhan was dead on. But how did my grandparents live completely satisfied lives? I mean, they had their trials and tribulations just like anybody. They had their arguments or whatever. How did they survive? I think the answer, at least in some symbolic truth, is that they didn't externalize what was needed to be satisfied with anything in their life. They were satisfied because the only paradigm that existed was themselves. And the way that they interacted with each other was that they had to bring the self to the table, metaphorically, and be good and be compatible with the other person. It's a strange thing that all of the baby boomers' parents, on average, died together. I mean, it's almost the inverse of the divorce rate that we have today. 97% get divorced today. I'm making that up a little bit, but it's super high, whatever the rate is. Take that and invert it. That's how many people stayed married back in the day. Of course, there's widows and widowers and that kind of stuff. That doesn't count. They had to get their act together as a human being, because when they sat in a room together, that's what existed. Imagine human beings in the 1800s and prior. You have no radio, no television, no film. So when you sat in that log cabin in the middle of nowhere, taking care of your farm and your livestock, and you got 20 kids, you had to get along. You had to figure it out. You made it happen. And people were a little more stoic back in those days because life was harder. We didn't really get into the romantic nature of daily living like we do today. I'm sure everything was romantic during the courtship and marriage side, but as soon as kids start popping out and you're expected to have 5 kids minimum because you got to have little helper hands at the farm and all that kind of stuff, well, they're, little tykes here and there, and you got to discipline them, keep them in check. And kids, I would imagine, were not so terribly influenced against their parents. Their rite of passage was within the paradigm of living within the family. Son, today you get to shoot a gun. Son, today you get to clean an animal. After we kill it, you get to take it down and hang it upside down and don't pierce the gut and all this other stuff. The girls did all their stuff, right? And they were always tomboys. I just want you to know that. One of my cousins, she used to break black stallions for a living. Beautiful girl. Got married, had some kids. But she was very Ellie Mae, if you will. Still very feminine. But, if you ticked her off, I'm sure she could break your nose in a split second, right? I want to make this episode because we constantly talk about everything that's wrong all the time. But we don't go back to simpler ways in any serious strategy. I was just at a Super Bowl party yesterday. I'm not a huge sports fan, but I'm from Kansas and the Chiefs are in there. And I knew that if Taylor Swift, the PSYOP, was on there, that my team was going to win. And they did, in a real miracle kind of way at the end. But it was a group of families. I must have been at least 6 husband and wives. There wasn't a single person at this party that didn't have a significant other married. And they had at least 1 to 3 kids all running around. And these kids were fantastic. They entertained. It was half girls, half boys. I mean, literally, it was the craziest, perfect distribution. And the girls did a little dance routine they went off and invented in the garage. It was just like, man, it was like the 70s again. And some of the mothers were talking about eventually in the kitchen area, which is all one big room, this beautiful house, what their rules are at night. And it was amazing. These parents said, they're not allowed to touch any electric device at all until 7 o'clock. Then they get like an hour with it, and then it's bedtime. And we monitor everything that they ingest. They don't just get to pull on any video game. They don't get to watch any television show. Even the cartoons are pre-censored by the parents to make sure there's no weird things going on. I was like, no wonder these kids are so well behaved. And there was not one ball baby moment in the entire day. And that, having raised a child myself, is remarkable because we were there they were probably there around 1 o'clock. I didn't get there till like 3:30. And the game went into overtime, and, some of the people peeled off, took their kids home, but no problems at all. No fighting. No one got hurt. Wasn't even a temporary crying moment. Wow. Amazing. And I think I can say this accurately. Every single kid in that house was raised either in a Christian school and or homeschool. And I talked to one of the dads who actually had a kid in his 30s, I think. Actually, no, he wouldn't have had a kid. He's probably a kid in his 20s. And he said, look, he goes, I wasn't terribly religious. I didn't put my kid in there to be, necessarily going to become a priest or anything. He just said that was the best school I had access to for my kid. And he goes, now I look at my kid as a grown man, and he's extremely well behaved, very successful. Everything he learned in school became a trade skill that he could use in his real life. And he's having problems because his friends aren't doing so well. They have a bunch of psychological issues. They're on a bunch of regimented drugs, right, to counteract their depression from not learning anything in school. It was interesting. I told this story one time, a long time ago. I'll tell it again because it's relevant here. When President 45 got in a couple terms ago, a very close friend of mine posted on Facebook the most asinine thing I'd ever read in my life. And this really became the point where I sort of disconnected from him, because you have to pick your friends. And if your friends transform into people that you wouldn't invite in on day one, you still got to clip them. You don't have to totally get rid of them, but you can definitely regulate communication. Let's put it that way. But he posted, now that this guy's in the White House, he's going to take America back 40 years. Now, of course, he was buying everything that they were selling about racism. Couldn't have been more unfounded comment ever posted on the internet. And I replied, oh, you mean when we used to actually learn something in school? When drugs were basically frowned upon? When we used to actually treat each other well? I mean, this guy grew up in California his whole life. Come on. He grew up in an area that never had the problems he thought were so real in the world, right? Now, with some of these subjects, you can always say, somewhere in the world, this bad thing is occurring. And it shouldn't be occurring, right? Some guy is beating up his wife. Someone is being racist. Someone is doing something bad that shouldn't be happening. Of course. But you can't generalize the entire world to seem intelligent. And of course, I didn't have daily communication with this person, but he moved from where he lived to a very liberal area. And it just overwhelmed him. He didn't have that ability to think for himself and police insanity around his life. And so he let himself absorb insanity until he became one of the insane. Now, not truly insane, but definitely doesn't have a grasp on true reality. And I want to make a point about this because it feeds into another reality. When you're in Los Angeles area, and what's interesting about it is, like, I had 2 decades that were extremely go to LA, because this is where the film industry was, it's where the entertainment industry is, both music and comedy, which I worked in all 3 of those areas, okay? You definitely meet people of different conservative natures or liberal natures, right? The interesting thing is that there's a group of people that interact with both sets of people, and that's usually your conservative folks. I'm telling you this is empirical truth, okay? And then there's a group that doesn't interact with anybody but their own group. That's usually the liberal side of things, right? What's funny about this is that my most one doth protest too much group friends that are just knee deep in just carrying agendas. You can't even have a lunch conversation without them touting something, dropping it, some unfounded scientific BS. I know them well. I know their life stories. I know who they hang out with. I know their colleagues back 30, 40 years because I know them and I know all their friends, especially in the film industry, in the rock and roll industry, in the comedy industry. The more lefty that my friends are, and especially people in my family, very interesting note, they have never ever had friends that weren't white. Never. I mean, if I said name 5 people that aren't white that are your best friends that you've worked with for 30 years, otherwise you got to blow your brains out, they'd have to load the gun and pull the trigger. They don't have associations with all these folks, but they're so convinced, okay, by their tribe that this racism thing's an issue. One doth protest too much. What does that mean? That means you're projecting yourself onto others. So the folks that keep telling you that racism has to be fought and beat and all this other stuff who are white, they rarely ever know anyone else that's non-white. And so they're living in a racist bubble, feeling that this is wrong, self-loathing themselves. And so if someone else can handle the racial issue, well, they're just great, because then they don't ever have to introduce themselves to a non-white. And someone else in their party is handling the racist issue that they carry every single day. They might even think they could get along with someone who wasn't of their own race. Who knows? They never try. Orange County, which is supposed to be some hideous, extreme right thing. We got brothers in here all the time. We got every race. In this room alone, this room is a melting pot of melting pots. It's not even owned by a guy who was born in America. It's great. And we get along like butter. It's no problem. We had the BLM faction do a big appearance downtown Huntington Beach on Main Street, and all of Main Street got boarded up like a hurricane was coming into town. I mean, horrendous. 3/4 inch thick plywood over every storefront. It was complete overkill and ridiculous. But we also had military and super SWAT team show up, which are all paramilitary guys. I mean, like badass dudes, right? Our cops are all ex-military, and they're sort of like in that upper ranger special forces, even higher than that, who have become police officers, right? So they can think for themselves. It's good. And the funny thing is that there's like 4 guys who weren't white that showed up. That was it. Everybody else was white showing up for this group. Our downtown, our citizens downtown were the most multiracial group of folks you'd ever see in your life. And all these different races were standing in front of the businesses ready to protect just in case someone went crazy. Nobody did. It was nice. Okay. In fact, it was a very peaceful thing. It was hilarious, to be honest. I filmed the whole thing, okay? But it was funny looking at this group going, okay, you're the whitest group of people that showed up to Huntington Beach, but you're treating us like we don't tolerate other races? Huh. You must feel pretty strange, considering we've got, 100 to 1 over you, just standing there ready to protect the possessions. These are their jobs, their businesses, and again, nothing happened. It was great. Thinking back the country 40 years, well, there's always things you would fix, right? I mean, every country's gone through its hardships, its recessions, and its BS presidents and chancellors and prime ministers and stuff. Sure, you might go back and you're like, I don't want that person back in office. But the overall household in a lot of wonderful places around the world really had things beautifully figured out. Over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, we figured out and boiled down and got rid of an overwhelming majority of the problems that these countries had. But let me throw this at you as well. Do you feel the pressure, whether or not you agree with it or not? Probably things you totally disagree with is what I'm really talking about here. But you go online and you start trying to think for yourself, because that's what you do if you watch this show. And then you're ingesting content, right? And your mind is rejecting a lot of the ads that you see, especially run before videos, or if you happen to be at a public place that's got a television on and it's like, 90% pharma commercials or whatever, and you just want to throw up because the programming is so evident, so in your face, right? And so you're trying to almost mentally push back this stuff that's coming in because it's nothing that you want. You scroll through Facebook, Instagram, X, whatever platform you're on. I don't do TikTok. But the ads that show up between there are just the last thing on earth you would ever buy, ever be involved with. And so you spend a fair amount of your time in this sort of rejection mode of your mental consciousness, because you're like, I don't believe in this. What is this, right? I want to suggest to you that the more that you have that feeling, I have it all the time. And you can obviously, most platforms will let you click on the upper hand corner, the little 3 dots, the ellipsis. You click that and you can say, not interested, irrelevant, and then they kind of take a little bit of a breather on that kind of content to you. But if you're you're ingesting, I should say, if you're ingesting any media of any kind, whether it be your streaming services or whatever, and you're constantly in that puke mode, right? You're like, oh my God, ugh. Then that's probably the sign that you should dump that platform out of your life. I know it's rough because there's a lot of contact we can get with these individuals, with friends of ours, right? And you can't deny, and they know they're doing this, okay? You can't deny, I'll be the first person to say that Facebook, Facebook alone has been responsible for some of the most significant resolutions of past events in my life where I knew a person. I'll just share one. I dated a girl back in the 89, 90, and she was an exchange student. I put her back on the plane and I never saw her again. And we wrote letters for a really short bit, but we immediately lost contact. She got married, has some kids, all good. But there was this unresolved thing because we didn't think that was going to be the last one we ever saw each other for various youthful reasons, right? And she had this pent up, bubble of like unresolved love. And I had the same thing. Now she's happily married. I met her husband through Facebook chat, it was cool. And he was so gracious to allow us to spend a few weeks together from time to time, but it was all up front, hey, I talked to him and, whatever. And on my end, I did the same thing as I was dating someone at the time. And her and I spent a couple, several days just talking, chatting. Hey, what's going on? Is my son, is my husband, where we live, blah, blah, blah. I was like, doing Google Maps. Oh, wow, that's cool. Let's see where you live. That's good. But eventually the bubble came. And at first, I think she went and she just basically had to sob this emotions out of herself. And then another day later, it hit me like a ton of bricks and was like, I couldn't talk. I got tears running down my face. I'm like, oh my God, this is all coming back out. Now, here's the cool thing. We both did that. And I don't know how many days or a couple weeks that may have continued after that. But after that, her and I sensed the lack of need to stay in contact. Of course, we're very intelligent people, so there's nothing inappropriate going on whatsoever. But it just faded away. And maybe I send her a happy birthday once a year. We don't chat. We've never done face chat since that moment. But we got that resolution through this online platform, which has a bunch of other stank in it, right? So there's this duality with some of these services where you say, yeah, I know I should get rid of that, but it does have this other thing. I'm not exactly sure how to get around that other than to maybe say, don't take on a bunch of virtual friends that you've never met in the real world. That could really help. Or like I do with Instagram, most of my subscriptions or my follows on Instagram are artists of some sort. Maybe a couple funny ones, but it's really things that just add positivity to my life or inspiration to my life. It's probably 80% artists. People do airbrush, people do pencil sketches, people do 3D art. I'm just watching how they do what they do, and I'm just like, wow, look how far they took the tool. I need to push myself a little further. And it's method too. You learn method, and you're like, oh gosh, I'm actually a really good sketch artist. I haven't sketched anything in years, right? Get back into it, right? So to that degree, you could probably create some policies in your life of interaction. It still has the ads in there. If you just get faster scrolling, you get past them and all that kind of stuff. But you have to determine whether or not it's a problem in your life, whether or not the content you don't want is getting too much. Take a break. A lot of people take months off. They'll even post on their social media, I'm taking a month off. I'm not dead. I'll see you in a month. And I don't know a single person that has done that didn't come back and say, that was the greatest month of my life, right? Then there's the other thing about time management and creativity. A lot of times, we know how it works today. You go to a restaurant, you're waiting for your food because you ordered something to go. Now you're just sitting there doing nothing. It's amazing. Sometimes I'll leave my phone in the car on purpose. I'll just go to a restaurant and sit down. And it'll be a restaurant that takes a little while to bring the food. And I just look around. Yeah, it gets kind of boring sometimes because my body is Pavlovianly trained to never be in my own mind 100%, right? I'm always doing something. But it's a part of our life, and we've allowed it to infect our existence. And so we've got to take inventory every once in a while and make sure that's what we still want in our game. If you're totally happy and totally successful, you probably got a good balance. But if you're finding yourself kind of fighting sort of, negative input, you got to reassess your situation. And I realize how cliche some of this might sound. But what I found in my life is sometimes you need someone just to tap you on the shoulder and remind you of the basics of life. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. And sometimes it's to get off your butt and do something that you can do and you're good at and you love, but you haven't done it in a while. Or it could be stop doing that. It's just destroying you. Everybody knows if they go to the gym and work out and eat better, that your body will look better and the mirror will become your best friend. But why don't we do it all the time? It's because we perceive, well, one, we're tired and we don't have the energy is what we think. And the funny thing is exercise actually makes you have more energy and you have less of that tired, weird feeling. So you really just have to get over that first gigantic speed bump to get into the realm to start getting what you want out of life, right? Now, I want to change subjects just a little bit here. It's sort of on point with what we're talking about because the manipulation's out there, but I want to get you hip to a trend that I think will be very productive for you. It's part of the gaslighting in the medical industry in general. You will have a report that says on one side that getting, the right amount of sleep, and we're all different. It depends on your age and your nutrients and how hard you work during the day. You need to get however much sleep you need before you get up. You don't want to get up half filled and then have a kind of a junky day because you're impatient. You're not executing really well because you're tired. Your eyes are burning, or your eyes are fine, but your body's really sagging because you didn't get enough sleep. And then the other side of the game is there are reports out there that basically say people who are happy sleep less and people who are depressed sleep more. Okay, well, if you hear a report like that, it's very ambiguous, right? It's there to jostle any truth that you think you might have found, okay? Now, technically speaking, that's probably true. That if you, I'll give an example. If I could get one of my films greenlit and I was on the rewrite staff, or let's just say all odds stacked against, I became the director of something I wrote, and I had a crew and I had people relying on me. The studios got pressure on me. The actors are relying on me to give them direction, cinematographer, everybody, right? Lighting, everything. Okay. I'm sure that in that euphoric crescendo of my careers that I have yet to accomplish, I would be not wanting to sleep because I want to get up and execute. Now, of course, they usually give you like Ambien or something like that, which will make you totally pass out unhealthily, I guess that's a word. But you would sleep less because you would have this excitement when you woke up. And I've told you guys 100 times, when I interview employees, I will say, when I'm just getting to know someone, what makes you tick? What's the best day of your entire life as an employee or a self-employed person of your entire life? And what made you spring out of bed in the morning to get excited to get back into whatever you do for a living? And I listen to the answer very carefully, and I take in not only the exact circumstances of that event, but I take in the theme of what was really driving that event, and I try to incorporate that in their daily responsibilities so that my company or my department incubates that moment for them. And I do it nice and slowly and gradually, not on purpose, but that's usually how it has to happen, so that my employees are on time in the morning. And it's the way that they would actually come in early if they could, if they could unlock the front door. That's what you want in your life, right? But there's still that truth of you've got to get enough sleep for your body. And you can definitely train down to a lesser amount of hours. That may be because you are involved in a project that's exciting. But again, if you don't take care of number one, no one's going to get a number one out of you, right? But the big thing that I think I want to reiterate before we close off here is the externalizing of your happiness, the externalizing of approval. One of the things I told my daughter when she was young is I said, don't ever let someone else control what you think of yourself. It's very, very important. And it was really about girls dating boys, because I saw this in high school, saw this in junior high. I see this as adults, where if someone, and men do it too, okay? I didn't have a son though, but if you allow your significant other, that maybe you love somebody and they don't love you yet, and that breaks your heart and makes you look in the mirror and go, something's wrong with me, right? It can be devastating. And sometimes when it's that blatant, a human being notices and maybe they self-correct. But what is social media right now, right? It's a ton of broken souls dealing with a psychosis of negative self-image. The idea that someone is spending, their entire life walking in front of a camera, that's the big thing for girls out there, right? Dressing up and walking in front of a camera, and their boyfriend or husband is filming them. They'll take their wedding rings off to give the sense that they're single, and their husband will be the first person, take the ring off, man. No one wants to be looking at a married woman, right? To what point is that? So you're pretending to be a single person online, or maybe you are a single person and you're just simply exacerbating this objectification of who you are to somebody else. You're purposely pushing your self-image out there. And if you don't get enough subs, if you don't get enough likes, well, must be something wrong with that outfit, must be something wrong with you at this point. When we know man is just a pattern creature. So people get tired of things. It has nothing to do with anything. What about all these movie stars that were absolutely amazing and we just simply got tired of their game? Jim Carrey. I know he kind of turned into a weirdo in the end, but way before he turned into a weirdo, he just kept making movie after movie after movie after movie, and he just made so many, and I think some stinkers, of course, but we just got tired of his game, People got tired of Ron Williams after a while. They got tired of Jonathan Winters after a while. They got tired of Danny Kaye after a while. These people didn't suddenly turn off their talent. It's just we had enough. Jerry Lewis, right? People got tired of it. He got tired of his weird, whiny, weird voice, and he started being a man in his movies, and people didn't want to buy those tickets. And so he invented all kinds of stuff in Hollywood, right? He was a much more significant person behind camera than he ever was in front of the camera, and that's saying a lot. This dude, every film set in the world uses Jerry Lewis's inventions, which is like a preview monitor of what the camera's got on it in a different room, so the director can sit off set and watch what's going on. He invented that, I have made, I think, an episode about simplification because as I hit 40, and my friends are typically older than me in various industries, right? And I watched the ones that were kind of, allowing age to become a problem for them. They started simplifying their life. Some of them didn't. The ones that simplified their life gained a whole new level of happiness. And simplification can be just defined as they ceased to be as gluttonous as they used to be, right? When they got enough, when they had what they needed, they just stopped buying. And they started using what they bought to become more fruitful in the world. So whatever skill set they had, they created that thing, whether it be film or special effects, and they got gold statues to put on their shelves at home. My buddy Sid, that guy lived with all the students of Art Center, with all of the folks from various creative realms of Hollywood. All the Imagineers would come over. He'd have a party for all the Imagineers once a year. But he lived an extremely simple life. And, this guy was very wealthy. And I remember going over his house once and I learned a really valuable trick, which comes right out of Kansas from where I'm from. And I remember going into his kitchen and he had an old tube television in an entertainment center, which mostly had just collectible stuff he had either worked on or just collected over the years. And I said, why do you still have this old television? They don't even make these things anymore. And he said, well, that's it's all I need. Now downstairs, he had a nice projection theater downstairs. But even that was fairly conservative. But what he really needed to do, what he needed to do was be able to see his material that he had drawn for movies in a nice setting in his own house. He wouldn't have to go to a movie theater necessarily, or because maybe they're not showing it right, but he wanted to see his material so he could look at it and evaluate, yeah, that was great, maybe I could have fixed that, and so he wanted to see things. So it was a very business-oriented thing downstairs. It was interesting. But his furniture in his house, even to this day, he's not there anymore, but his partner is. It's the top of the top. Barcelona chairs, right? That I think were made in the 30s. Still perfectly kept, perfectly modern, perfectly beautiful. Leather sofas that are just the best in the world. Super designer looking stuff. He spent his money wisely. He needed a sofa. He bought a quality one. I bet his sofa's 30 or probably 40 or 50 years old. Looks perfect to this day. Not crackled or weird. Took care of it. And it's sexy and cool and stylish, right? You're walking into like sort of a 70s Austin powerhouse. I mean, it's just phenomenal. You get a vibe from this entire house that just makes you want to just crank out whatever the heck you do. And so I had these mentors that were reinforcing what was most important in life. But when I go out to the public, it's all about, oh, I lease a car now because I have to have a new car every 2 years. Well, why? Well, I want a new one. Okay. Well, there's something external about that. Nice cars are nice cars. You get a nice car, you can pay it off and then keep it a few more years without any payments and buy a new one and pay that off. And you'll still have a sexy car, trust me. It'll ride well, it'll look good. Just be more picky about what you buy. Don't buy some car that's outside your means using a lease because you want a Mercedes, but you can't really afford one that looks good. So you buy kind of a crappy one, you drive that, and then, of course, you're tired of it. It wasn't what you really wanted in the first place. Save your money, get one a little more expensive, if that's your game, if you're materialistic like that. Sometimes you got to do a lot of driving, and that's a nice thing to have. If you're going to spend most of your life in your car, or a third of your life in a car, yeah, it should be a good ride, shouldn't it? It should be reliable. And if you like to exude your creative dimension, well, sometimes people want to have a nicer vehicle. All right, it's more of a need than a want necessarily. And if you can live within your means and do it, then do it. It's a really strange thing when achieving your goals is giving up something you're really used to. We don't want to hear it. We don't even want to hear that thought go through our own minds, do we? No, you need this, right? It's just like the old metaphor of the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. As odd as that sounds, there's a lot of folks that are coming to terms with the fact that there is some sort of organic life force out there that does it. We're born with the good right into our chest, which is one of the reasons why I think there's a God. But boy, the atmosphere around us, the air and oxygen around us is full of the other force, the one that's trying to tear you apart. And it was, I think when I was in church as a late teenager, somebody said, it's not and I've said this in several episodes as a result of hearing this, the devil, if I had to describe it in its most active, proactive, destructional algorithm in your life, goes like this. And if you're atheist, it's fine. Just think about it in a different term. Metaphors are good for the communication of these concepts, right? But it's not the big lies that the devil tells you. It's all the little tiny ones. I have a philosophy in life. It's not really the big decisions in your life that ruin your life. It's all the little teeny tiny ones, the tens of thousands of millions of little tiny decisions you make throughout every day, week, month, year that destroy your life. And it's those little, you bite off a little bit of habit. You bite off a little, well, it's not going to hurt me. I'll just do a little bit. And it becomes a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Part of that's, unfortunately, the way the brain works. You take a drug. Boy, you take acid for the first time. Make sure it's real acid, okay? Don't get it from somebody off the street. But you take real acid for the first time and your trip is insane. I mean, it's just like you'll never have that first trip ever again. Apparently, according to Robert Downey Jr., heroin does the same thing. He calls it chasing the dragon. Okay. But you have to take more, and you have to take more, and you have to take more to even get remotely close to what you had on that first trip. I took a pretty small amount of acid on my first trip. I have a whole episode on LSD if you want to know all the details about that. But the second trip, I took twice as much. And even though the swells of sort of physical feeling definitely was a little more significant, it came on a little bit faster. I never had the visions that I had in the first one. I never hallucinated again. I only had a couple tiny little hallucinations that were just hilarious, which if you want to know about those, go watch the episode. I think it's in season 1. But the third time and final time I took it, I did a massive dose. I don't even know how much it was, but where the first time took about 45 minutes to start. The second one took about 30 minutes to start. The third one, 15 minutes. I could feel it. But I never got anywhere near that first small dose because the brain is canceling it out. The brain is going, I've seen this before. Whatever. And as something unknown comes to you, you don't know how to handle it. And so second and third time, I knew how to like ride the wave and get creative with things. That's why I'm extremely concerned within my own life about varying things a lot, like food. I don't like to vary my food that much. One, I think my body needs nutrition, and I think I want to tell my body at noon, at least 50 times a week, I'm eating this, this, and this. So when you gear up to process my food at noon, you're going to expect eggs and bacon and iced tea. Like that's it. And you won't have anything else really introduced to that. In the evenings, I'm a little more varied, but I usually don't like to. I could eat the same place for 3 or 4 days in a row. It teaches my body this is something you can rely on. But 2, it also keeps my mind from needing something new all the time. That's a disease, man. You know, what is it with online streaming television? Well, most people are bored to death and they'll look at like feeds and they'll be subscribing to it and they're in whatever their favorite feed is, HBO, Disney Plus, Netflix, and like, nothing new. And you get all angry at it, man. I watch guys do this all day long. There's tons of stuff that's new, but it's all crap. It's the same filtered, retold stories. It's just crap. I think that, as silly as this sounds, okay, anything that you're leasing versus buying, well, you're training your body to have this new thing. So now think about it. You're conservative, but you're barren. You're not living a fruitful life according to any definition of a fruitful life. And this pattern, this need to constantly renew everything. Well, how could you possibly get in a relationship and make it work if your body's saying new? You can't, because your spouse has to be new too. YouTube has a new thing. It's hideous. It's got these shorts now. And it's bad enough that YouTube videos are super duper short most of the time. People, again, harassed me for the first 2 years. Make something short, man. You get a lot more followers. I'm like, man, I don't give a shit about that, right? If you're on board, you're on board. If you're not, hey, go watch a kiddie video for 5 seconds, right? But these little shorts, you hit the down arrow on your remote and it plays a little short. And it's it'd be something kind of interesting, but then you go another one. What is that doing to your brain? It's turning you into a nonlinear mind, fishbowl brain. Goldfish brain, right? You're Ellen DeGeneres in the movie Finding Nemo. You can't remember anything 30 seconds later. It impacts the way you communicate with others. It absolutely prevents you from planning anything in your future. And more importantly, you can't see the consequences of anything. Well, just do this because what could possibly happen? And then boom, the worst thing in the world happens to you because you can't play chess for more than one move inside your brain. It's bad news, people. But if you think that the people who invent these features don't understand the overall impact to the psychology of man, and you're thinking, oh, it's just to make more imprints, it's to show more ads and all this, you might be right about that on the technical realm, but there's a battle on for your mind, right? As one website always says. And it's absolutely true. Not only they're just trying to pump in who you hate and who you love, and what's wrong with people, it's like hate everybody is basically what they want you to think, right? Unless they're conforming to the end of the world. And then it's great. You believe all that science that says the world's going to end, They love that. But their agendas always require a setup and a punchline. Always a setup and a punch, setup and a punch. Well, if you can't see the punch coming, then you're always going to fall for the setup constantly. So regulate that kind of stuff in your brain. And again, I went to dinner tonight. 2 parents eating food. 2 tiny little girls next to me. Cutest little things on planet Earth. And there's a phone on a kickstand so the kid could watch cartoons during dinner. Nicely turned down. It was really, I actually did a fairly polite version of it. But I looked over and I said, oh my God, that kid's done. That kid is now, the parents are out of the game. The phone is raising the child. And whatever's coming through that phone, it's dinner time. Sit and eat dinner. You need to learn how to eat dinner, kid, right? My father was extremely militant about dinner time. You sit down, you shut up, you eat your food, you engage in the conversation, maybe share a few of your own little experiences throughout the day, hold your utensils right. Seriously, my father was like, don't hold that like an idiot. He taught me how to hold a fork and da-da-da. It was like, I used to think the guy was nuts. Once I criticized my mother's food. Woof. That was a once in a lifetime situation, right? Coming to find out later, my dad's like, he's like, yeah, she always cooked that one thing I didn't like. But he never said anything because he's a man and not some little punk ass bitch, right? Anyway. Hope you feel me in all these. This is just sort of one of these cleanup episodes so I can get all this content out while it's fresh in my mind. I think we're all fighting the same exact demons. And I mean, quite literally the same algorithms. And so if we stop buying what they're selling, and there's two groups that are selling, right? In my opinion, Tucker Carlson talked about this too. The first one is obviously companies selling crap. Television channels selling crap, movies selling crap, corporations selling crap. Agenda. We all know about those. The other one that Tucker Carlson just talked about, which I think was interesting, was there is the demonic force out there. And you don't have to be religious to just get on board with that. But there's this life force that basically feeds off of your life going bad. And whatever emotional output we put on frequency, low frequency, negative frequency, panic, fear, all that stuff, it's just feeding off of it like a meal. And so the more that you allow external factors to tell you what you're thinking, it's lubing the pump for that other force to get in and manipulate you, right? You have to see, I'm going to do an episode on this. I figured it out. I've been trying to figure out new movies I could cover. There is going to be an episode coming, and you can watch it ahead of time, which would help, on the movie called Branded. It's a indie movie filmed in Russia, I think, just to make sure that no one recognized any of the buildings, was the cool part. But it has some serious actors in it, and it is a science fiction-based film. But man, oh man, if you watch that film and you don't see today in that film 15 years ago, I'll be shocked. I'll be utterly shocked. I think it's around 2009 or something like that. But I'll cover it and you guys get to see how they made a movie that was utterly predictive programming, a big part of today. Now, what was it? Idiocracy is another one that I won't cover, but it was, was it Mike Judge? That's his name, right? The Beavis and Butthead guy, basically expressing how much he was having to suck the tit of that faction to get his films made, right? The group that's making Idiocracy true is the group that's accusing the folks that aren't making it true of making it true. It's hilarious, right? Go download the app that tells you where all the poop is in San Francisco and tell me who's creating Idiocracy, right? It's not you and I. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything's up there. To the PayPal and Patreon folks, thank you so much. You make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.